Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Mr. Sanders Twin again, and welcome back to the couch. So it is quite cold out there. I got my sweatshirt on, I got my hot tea. I am a little curious as to how cold it is exactly. Um, 1 second, let's look at the weather for. Oh, wow, it is currently 7 degrees, but with the wind chill, it is -11. Wow. So I hope everybody's staying warm today, because this cold is no joke. Chapter 10, A New Reality. The morning after the nightmare, I opened my eyes and looked around slowly. Where am I? And then all at once, the horrible memory of the day before came flooding back. Yes, I thought, it really happened. I went to school that day. Amelia dropped me off on her way to her nurse's assistant job. My body was there, sleepwalking through the halls, but my head was in the sky. At least school was a distraction. And with Springfest on the way, I couldn't bear to miss rehearsal for the one good thing I had going for me. Pain and humiliation mingled in my heart. As usual, I kept my home life under wraps. That afternoon during chorus, Mr. Stewart sensed something was off with me. "You okay?" he asked, concerned. I nodded and mustered a fake smile. He looked like he knew I was hiding something, but he didn't pry. Over the next week, Mommy and Poppy called from prison. The conversations were all the same: tears, apologies, instructions on what to do. As Poppy suspected, their chances of remaining here were minuscule. "Has anyone from immigration tried to contact you?" my father asked. "No," I told him. Neither ICE nor the Massachusetts Department of Children and Family had contacted me. This meant that at 14, I'd been left on my own. Literally. The same authorities who deported my parents hadn't bothered to check whether I, a 14-year-old citizen of this country, would be left without a family, adult supervision, or even a home. On the other hand, if the authorities did find me, then there was the nightmarish possibility of being put into foster care with complete strangers. Anytime the thought of it came up, I pushed it out of my brain with dread. To be put in a family I hadn't chosen meant I'd really be out of control of my life, my future. What kind of household would I be put into? Who were social workers and cops to know which family was right for me? Would they even care about matching me with the right people? I'm fortunate that Amelia agreed to take me in temporarily, but no one in our government was aware that she'd done so. In the eyes of ICE, it was as if I didn't exist. I'd been completely invisible to them. My future was unsure, but as long as I stayed with Amelia, I knew I was loved and cared for. All right, everybody, we're going to answer the first question. Why is Diane grateful that the ICE authorities didn't find her? Make sure you're paying attention to this paragraph right here. On the other hand, if the authorities did find me, then there was the nightmarish possibility of being put into foster care with complete strangers. A sentence starter could be: Diane is grateful that the ICE authorities didn't find her because blank. All right, let's go ahead and move on. 2 weeks after my parents were sent to prison, Amelia took me to visit Poppy. By then, both he and Mommy had been transferred from jails in Boston to detention centers in New Hampshire. One part of me longed to see my father, but another part dreaded the visit. Seeing my dignified, loving dad in prison would be painful. People in prison are thought of as criminals, thugs, gangsters. No matter who they might be, what they've done or haven't done, they're also, like my parents, humans, people with families. He deserved all the respect in the world, and I cringed at the thought of him in chains. Barbed wire fence surrounded the brown brick buildings. The security checkpoints were guarded by guards, and barking Dobermans. I couldn't believe that a man who'd never jaywalked or run a red light had been sentenced or had been sent to a place like this. Inside, our purses were searched like at an airport. Once we'd made it through the metal detector, we dropped off the suitcase I'd packed for Poppy. We were led to a large windowless area where about 50 others were waiting. A few people were alone. Some had small children with them. All were there for the same reason I was, to spend a few minutes with someone who had been detained, who might be deported. Amelia and I locked eyes. I wonder if she and everyone else could hear my heart pounding. At the side of the room, a door opened. Prisoners entered in single file behind the guards. All wore orange jumpsuits. Amelia and I rose in anticipation of finding Poppy. One inmate, two, 7, 10. Loved ones reunited and hugged, settling in to talk as we continued to wait. At last, after about 30 men had come in, I spotted Poppy. I hardly recognized him. His chin and neck were covered in stubble, and he looked thin. His hair was unkempt, his teeth yellow. His smart, observant eyes looked wary. I saw the look of despair. Months before, in that lawyer's empty office, I'd seen my father at his most powerless. This was worse. We hugged tightly. "Forgive me," he said once he'd let me go. "I don't have any toothpaste in here." My father, so meticulous about hygiene, was self-conscious of his breath and appearance. He cupped his hand over his mouth in shame. I glanced around nervously, unsure of what to say. "How are you, Iha?" Poppy asked, trying to break the ice. I started to cry. "Don't cry," he told me. I wanted to hug him again, but another one of the prison rules was limited contact. "We talked about this," he told me. "You knew this could happen." All right, let's go ahead and answer the next question. Why does Diane hardly recognize her father? Make sure you pay attention to this paragraph right here. I hardly recognized him. His chin and neck were covered in stubble, and he looked thin. His hair was unkempt, his teeth yellow. His smart, observant eyes looked weary. I saw the look of despair. All right, let's go ahead and uh, use the sentence starter. Diane hardly recognizes her father because blank. All right, let's go ahead and continue. A shot of anger surged through me, which caught me by surprise. Sure, I'd been aware I could lose him and Mommy, maybe, one day, but after years of no issues with immigration services, I'd been lulled into thinking we might just be safe. I convinced myself that if it were going to happen, it already would have. Then, without warning, reality socked me in the face. I'm not sure any preparation could have helped lessen the sting. "Have you been keeping up with your schoolwork?" Poppy asked. "Yes," I said, gripping the edges of the hard plastic chair so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Small talk was easier than saying goodbye, though. I wanted to avoid the inevitable truth that we'd soon be forced apart. "Have you been eating?" my father asked. I looked over at Amelia. "Yes, everything's good, Poppy," I told him. "I'm sharing a room with Gabriella. It's nice." My dad turned to Amelia, who hadn't spoken a word. "Thank you so much for taking her in," he told her. Amelia nodded. "Maria and I appreciate it. We really do." He promised to send money from Colombia each month to cover my basic expenses. Poppy looked at the floor, then up at me. "I want you to know how badly I feel about all of this," he told me. Near the end of the visit, my father stood, placed his hands gently on my shoulders, and leaned as close as he could to my right ear. "Te amo," he whispered. "I love you. Sé fuerte. Be strong. Don't forget that." He kissed my forehead quickly before the guards could call him out for getting too close. A bell rang. Time was up. All the inmates stood. "No, Poppy," I called out. He shushed me with a gentle hand gesture. Watching my daddy, my beach bud, My friend walk away in that orange jumpsuit was one of the hardest moments I had ever endured. The ride home was silent. I glowered at the freeway out the window, recalling the years of worry my family had spent fearing arrest. I now wished we'd set aside the anxiety and instead simply savored our time together. All that worrying hadn't changed anything. If there was to be no happily ever after for my family, then we should have just lived as happily as we could have while we were still together. Here's how I describe the women's prison waiting room: hot, crowded, musty. Charming, right? Metal chairs lined the cement walls. A teenage mom tried to calm down her screaming baby. 2 seats over from her, an old man dozed off with his cane at his side. No one spoke. Amelia leaned toward me. "You ready, hun?" she asked. "I guess," I said, although I knew that wasn't true. "I don't think you're ever actually ready to see your own mom locked up, and definitely not when you may never see her again." But I couldn't say that out loud. The guard, a tall black man with dreads, lumbered into the doorway. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced in a Jamaican accent, "no cell phones are permitted in the visitation area with the detainees," he said. The detainees. His words hung there, thick and heavy. Weeks earlier, my mommy had simply been the loving mother who combed my long black hair into a ponytail. The mom who made sure I brushed my teeth and finished my homework. Then in one afternoon, mommy had been suddenly labeled a prisoner, a detainee, and in less than 1 hour, she'd be forced out of the country. Okay, so that's some foreshadowing right there. We made our way down a hall and into a second waiting area, which was somehow even more depressing than the first. The guard rounded the corner into the room. "When you hear your name," he barked, "please stand and follow me." I held my breath. 10 names in, I heard what I'd been listening for but dreading. "Diane Guerrero," he announced. Amelia and I took our places among the others and filed out behind the guard. Halfway down the hall hung a sign: "Inmate Visitation Area." The guard swung a steel door open. He motioned for us to walk through. Under fluorescent lights, about 20 inmates in orange jumpsuits sat lined up in booths behind a giant plastic barrier. Every booth had an old school phone in its upper left hand corner. 5 or 6 guards milled around, just watching. I scanned the row. There in the middle was Mommy. I walked across the linoleum and slid into the chair facing her. Amelia reached up and handed me the phone. In the weeks since her arrest, Mommy's beautiful face had aged 20 years. She seemed tired and frail, like she hadn't slept for days. I'd never seen her so skinny. Her eyes were red. Her usually golden skin was pale. Her wrists were handcuffed together and resting in the lap of her orange jumpsuit. A guard on her side of the barrier placed the phone in her hands. She lifted it to her ear. "Hello, my princess," she said. Her voice was so soft that I almost couldn't hear her. "How are you?" My fingers trembled as I stared at her through the scratched plastic. "I'm okay," I said. I bit down on my lip to keep the tears from escaping. It didn't work. I'm fine," I stammered. Mommy dropped her head. "Don't cry, baby," she said, just as Poppy had. Her own eyes betrayed her, though. They too were shiny with tears. "Please don't cry. I'm really sorry about this whole thing. I'm so sorry, Diane." She didn't mean for her words to sting, but they did. She was sorry. My dad was sorry. The whole world was sorry. But none of it changed my situation. None of it altered the fact that by dusk they would be gone and my childhood would be over. My mother looked intently at me. "What are you going to do, Diane?" It was a big question for a mother to ask her child, but I knew my answer. I sat forward in my chair. "I'm staying, Mommy," I said. "I've got to stay." I'd somehow always known I'd remain. What would I do in Colombia, a place I'd never even been to? What kind of life could I have in a nation so poor that my parents had risked everything to escape? "You see that guy?" My mother tilted her head toward a Dominican looking guard on my side of the plastic. He must have felt us staring because he looked over at us. You know what he told me? She asked. What? I asked. She moved the receiver as close to her mouth as she could. He said immigration only goes after people if they get a tip. What do you mean? I mean, they're not going around looking for random janitors, she told me. Someone had to inform them about us. I gazed at her. But who would have done that? I don't know for sure, she told me. She inhaled and then slowly released her breath. That's why you gotta watch your back, she said. Be very careful, Diane. The face of our unsympathetic neighbor flashed before my eyes. Could it be? Who would do this to us? I started to cry, and this time I didn't hold back. Enormous tears rolled down my cheeks and dripped from my chin. I wiped my face with the edge of my t shirt. Amelia, who'd been standing beside me the whole time, rubbed my back. The Dominican guard walked in our direction. Are you her daughter? He asked me. I nodded my head yes. It's okay, sweetheart, he said. We're not going to hurt your mom. All right, we're going to go ahead and answer the third question. Why does Diane's mother believe they had been detained? You'll want to refer to these few paragraphs right here. She moved the receiver as close to her mouth as she could. He said immigration only goes after people if they get a tip. What do you mean? I mean, they're not going around looking for random janitors, she told me. Someone had to inform them about us. And you can use a sentence starter. You can say, she believes they had been detained because blank. All right, let's go ahead and finish the chapter and answer the last question. That made me cry even louder. So why does she have to wear those handcuffs? I shouted, thrusting my chin towards Mommy's sore wrists. Can't you take them off? She's not going to do anything. Several people looked over at me. I'm sorry, but she has to have those on, he told me. That's the rules. Soon after, a guard on my mother's side yelled, Wrap it up! 5 minutes! Mommy scooted to the edge of her stool and put her face right up to the barrier. I love you, honey, she whispered. She paused, stared down at the floor, and then looked back at me. Never forget that. I'm so proud of you. Be a good girl, okay? I let go of the receiver and cut my hands over my eyes. There were so many things I needed to tell her, so many words I'd stored away. I wanted to stand up and scream. My mother is not a criminal. Don't you people understand? You've got the wrong family. Please, let her go. But all I could do was wail. Bye, Mommy, I said between sobs. Goodbye. Our time was up. Amelia held my hand while we walked back down the corridor. This isn't the end for you, Diane, she said to reassure me, but it felt like the end. As devastated as I was for my mom, I was even more scared for myself. She and my dad were returning to their Colombian home. I was stepping into a future I'd prayed would never come. Already, I felt so alone. Outside in the parking lot, Amelia tried to remember where she'd parked her car. Suddenly, we saw a white police van pull up. Amelia and I exchanged a look. Seconds later, two guards herded some inmates out onto the curb. My mother was among them. She turned and caught a glimpse of me. She froze. I could tell she wanted to say something, to run to me. But before she could make a move, a guard rushed her into the van. Let's go, he snapped. The van's engine rumbled. From her seat in the rear, Mommy twisted herself around so she could see me through the bars on the windows. She was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Then all at once, I understood. I love you, she was mouthing. I love you, I love you, I love you. She repeated the three words until the van turned from the lot and disappeared. The next day, I began a new life, one uncertain and frightening. A makeshift family, a different home, a path I'd prayed so hard that I'd never end up taking. My mother's warning, the haunting admonition, echoed through me. Be careful, be careful, be careful. All right, we're going to answer the last question. What happens to Diane's mom at the end of the chapter? You'll find what you're looking for in this paragraph right here. Seconds later, two guards herded some inmates out onto the curb. My mother was among them. She turned and caught a glimpse of me. But before she could make a move, a guard rushed her into the van. Let's go, he snapped. A sentence starter could be Diane's mom is blank. All right, everybody, that is it for chapter 10. That was a rather sad chapter. We gained a lot of insight about what Diane's parents are going through, being detained, and we also get a lot about Diane's emotional state. Must be really hard for her to lose both her parents like that. But anyway, hopefully the next chapter will be a little bit happier, but we'll see. So until then, take care.